There's been an interesting development with the Cleveland Browns that I'd like to touch on in this video. It started about a week ago when the Arizona Cardinals released wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins, and he becomes a free agent and he can sign with whoever he chooses. And at first, there's not really anything connecting him to Cleveland besides the fact that he did play with Deshaun Watson in Houston. But besides that, nothing really there. There's not even really that much smoke. DeAndre Hopkins had gone on to a podcast earlier in that week where he listed some quarterbacks that he would be interested in catching the ball from, and Watson just wasn't mentioned on that list at all. No mention of him in that podcast. Just kind of, he used to play with Deshaun Watson, so maybe that could be a fit, but besides that, there wasn't really anything there. But as the week has gone on and time has passed, this idea certainly seems to have caught some legitimacy. As of recording this, they are the current odds-on favorite to land DeAndre Hopkins. Although it's interesting because the only real reporting I've seen lending any credence to this idea is that Hopkins would be open to coming to Cleveland, which I'm sure as a free agent with plenty of options available to him, I'm sure he would be open to a lot of different situations. But we are where we are, where the Browns currently seem to be the betting front runner. That could just be a lot of people putting money on the Browns and the betting houses reacting accordingly to where if DeAndre Hopkins does go there, then they're not losing out on all sorts of money. But there could be a combination of other things, such as teams like the Chiefs and the Bills, where Hopkins did mention that Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, those two quarterbacks in that podcast, that everyone kind of assumed that's where would be the front runners for DeAndre Hopkins to go. Neither of those two teams really seem to be interested in making a huge effort to pursue him, as the Chiefs technically do have the ability to restructure enough deals to create enough cap space for DeAndre Hopkins, but the Chiefs don't really seem to be willing to do that, and the Bills are in a similar situation where they have very limited cap space, and they would have to make some moves to acquire him, and the Bills don't seem all that interested in making that move happen either. Where with the Browns, they have much more current cap space. They wouldn't have to do nearly as much legwork in order to fit DeAndre Hopkins within the cap. So that could be something that's working in the Browns' favor. And the Browns also really haven't taken themselves out of this race either. I haven't really seen any official comment on DeAndre Hopkins as of yet, to where there's rumors and stuff that these Browns players are trying to recruit Hopkins to come over, which that's good for rumors and stuff, but you can take all those with a grain of salt, because I'm sure there are plenty of NFL players from a bunch of teams that are trying to get DeAndre Hopkins on their team, of course. So I feel like it's not really an issue of whether the Browns can do the legwork. The Browns have shown that they're willing to restructure deals and push things back years if they feel like they can get the right guy, like they did with Zadarius Smith earlier. But it does seem like it might be a question of whether they should. And most of my issue with what the Browns signing DeAndre Hopkins would mean isn't my issue with Hopkins himself. But according to Jack Duffin on Twitter, which is a great follow for just knowing the Browns' cap space and their financial situation, I mentioned him before, and I'll continue to mention him. The Browns do have a smidge less than $14 million in cap space, and the Browns have already invested a lot in their wide receiver room this offseason with the Elijah Moore trade, acquiring Marquise Goodwin. They drafted Cedric Tillman with their first pick in the third round. So they've done a lot they've done a lot to improve that wide receiver room, and that cap space, I think it could be used at another position that might be not as shored up as that wide receiver room. I'm still not convinced of any of their defensive tackles besides their free agent signing in Dalvin Tomlinson. Their draft pick in the third round looks encouraging. He's a huge guy, but we've never seen him at the NFL level. Linebacker, they did re-sign Anthony Walker, and he should be healthy and ready to go at the start of the season. But I'm not super pumped about the depth beyond that at that linebacker position. And also, if they might not want to make any more moves this offseason and save them, give themselves some cap flexibility at the trade deadline. You never know who might become available at what position, who might fall out of favor with a team, who might stir up some drama and need a change of scenery. So you definitely might want to consider some cap flexibility for that. And if you spend all of your cap in the offseason, you really kind of hamstrung yourself to where if you could make a move that could improve your team in an area that it needs it, but you spent all your cap space on strengthening a wide receiver room that already does look pretty strong, then maybe you kind of missed out on that. And also, if DeAndre Hopkins wants a multi-year deal with his next team, then that would also further complicate cap issues down the road. Whereas with the Zadarius Smith contract, they restructured that to where, he is taking on a bigger cap hit this season, but he hits free agency next year, and he's not a cap problem after this season. They can deal with each 1 year at a time, and a lot of the free agent signings have been just for 1 year, with the exception of that Dalvin Tomlinson thing, because the Browns really do need long-term stability at that defensive tackle position. But a lot of their signings, even with some of their big name guys, have been just for 1 year. Anthony Walker comes to mind. They got him back just on a 1-year deal. So if DeAndre Hopkins wants a multi-year deal, that might complicate things a little bit also. Look, if there was no cap and money wasn't an object, this would be almost a no-brainer to try to pursue DeAndre Hopkins as much as possible. But then teams like the Chiefs and Bills wouldn't be so hesitant either. And honestly, even though you can be as optimistic about this Browns roster as you want, the Chiefs and the Bills, with their just more recent success and their dynamic quarterbacks, are probably more attractive options to a guy like Hopkins than the Browns are. But that's where the cap space comes in. And also, even if we get rid of the caps talk for a second, it is worth mentioning that DeAndre Hopkins will be 31 entering the season, which, again, it isn't ancient by NFL standards. It doesn't mean that he's automatically washed. He can still put in a very, very good year, even a great year at his age, even for an NFL wide receiver. But this is far from prime production. It does seem like the age doesn't – it definitely works against him. If he follows normal wide receiver trajectory, his play is going to – decrease rather than increase. But again, that isn't a guarantee, but I do think that it is something worth mentioning. And eventually Father Time is undefeated, and who knows when that comes for DeAndre Hopkins. Again, it might not be an issue for a few years down the road, but I feel like it is something, a conversation that you start to get into when do you really want to spend the rest of your cap space acquiring this player who might not have as much in the tank as he did. I know you have Amari Cooper as your current wide receiver run, so even if you think Hopkins isn't as dynamic as he was, he could be the second guy to Amari Cooper. But again, if you're spending the rest of the cap space that you could allocate to different areas, or you could stash it for a rainy day if a player becomes available that you don't expect to, then maybe that becomes an issue of why you shouldn't. But again, the Browns still the technically odds-on favorite as of recording, so maybe my reasoning for not signing him will fall on deaf ears. I wouldn't be mad if they did. This isn't me saying that I hope they don't sign him, but I do feel like it's not necessarily as much of a slam dunk move as some of Browns fans are making it seem out to be. But again, I wouldn't be angry if they did this. I do feel like it would make the wide receiver room definitely better. I don't think acquiring DeAndre Hopkins makes your team worse. I just feel like maybe they could save that cap space or spend it in a better, in a way that makes a worse position better than this wide receiver room that's already seen a lot of improvement from last season. Thank you all for watching this video. If you made it this far into it, that's going to be it from me. I will see you at the next one.